All right, we're going to pick up where we left off and re-examine the idea of the consumer society in the 18th century. So we talked a lot about this idea of the commercial revolution leading to a consumer revolution. So I just wanted to provide some examples of that. And we need to see that's not really truly a consumeristic society in the way we think of it today, but it's definitely laying the groundwork of that the Industrial Revolution really speed up. So the key is here in the second half of the 18th century is really when the first Industrial Revolution is picking up, mainly with textile production. We see a lot of consumerism. So I'm going to give you some examples of that. This is mostly seen in the clothing industry in the second half of the 18th century. And so this is due to the fact that the first industrial revolution was mainly focused on mass production of textiles. And so for those that had money in a growing commercial economy, there was a way to appeal, to market, and get them into stores to buy these sorts of things. And so this is kind of laying the groundwork for the way we kind of live our life in the modern world, in which we go to stores and we consume goods and we buy goods. So this consumer revolution, as we talked about yesterday, is focused around commodities, as you see in your DBQ, and then also around later, what will become later textiles, is going to lay that groundwork for a Western consumer society. So, leaving consumerism, I want to talk a little bit about the social history, and we'll move into the idea of medicine. Medicine in European history, for most of the past, has been very rudimentary. Very little in real medical care. Medical ideas, anatomy, they're all based on Galen up until really we get to the scientific revolution. There's challenges to the authoritative text. And those challenges come in the form of the Enlightenment in a lot of ways. Scientific revolution, Enlightenment, started to try to bring logic and reason to understanding medicines and really try to get away from superstition and acceptance of authoritative texts where it's unproven or based on observation. So we saw a little bit of that with like Harvey or Vesalius. We saw that in examination. However, these new medical practices aren't necessarily going to improve medicine in the short term. The Enlightenment misses, in the scientific revolution, miss a lot of key concepts. So they're trying to apply observation and learning to medicine, but they don't have all the pieces. And one of the key pieces here really is to really understand the physiology of human beings and also to understand the causes of diseases. And their lack of understanding of the causes of diseases are going to lead to several poor practices that exist despite the fact of the scientific revolution. Here you see a picture of a hospital from the period. It's dated 1746. Hamburg Hospital, and you can see it's chaotic, it's dirty. Hospitals are oftentimes seen as a place where you went to die rather than you went to be healed. And this really had to do with a fundamental lack of understanding of disease. And that's not going to come until the 19th century when germ theory is pushed. They're really going to see severe changes in medical practices. So you had doctors exploring and trying to understand the human body by observing and testing and experimenting, but they still lack the medical knowledge to make those big changes to the medical field. So in the 1700s, we see a midwife. A great example of this is midwives. Up through the 1700s, even through the early part of the 19th century, midwives were a much safer option for childbirth than local physicians because of long passed down practices that it actually worked. So when we look at medicine, it's not making its great headway until we get into the 19th century. For example, McKay brings up some of the examples of bloodletting, for instance, letting out bad blood. That there's this idea that diseases are caused by some kind of bad blood that has to be drained out. Oftentimes, those only made the sickness worse. Surgeons were starting to cut in and try to do surgery, but without the knowledge of germ theory, they tended to spread disease and kill off people. So it's not really till we get into the second industrial revolution, as we're going to see, that medicine is going to greatly improve. The one exception of this is the smallpox inoculation, and it's a huge exception. The world's first vaccine, done by Edward Jenner, marked the highest point of medical progress in this time period, and it was based on observation. Jenner had observed that people that had contracted cowpox, which is not really deadly in humans, tended to not get smallpox, and he made the assumption that they must somehow be related. So he forms the world's first vaccine by essentially inoculating people with cowpox and finding that their immune system would then protect them from smallpox. So this was a huge step. But even Jenner didn't quite understand why the disease was happening. He doesn't understand pathogens. And that's going to have to wait. So despite the great achievements of the scientific revolution and the ideas of logic and reasoning and the Enlightenment, medicine doesn't make great gains until really the second half of the 19th century. Here we see an example of bloodletting. So one of the last features we're going to talk about in the changing life of the people is going to be the issue of religion as well. An interesting feature of the Enlightenment period is that as scientific revolution transfers in the Enlightenment, logic and reasoning is really highlighted. Many of the intellectuals of Europe start turning to deism, or even on the further extreme, propositions of atheism are starting to come up. But in this time period, there's also a revival of religion, a fairly huge revival of religion. And the reason for this is that not everybody converts to deism. Not everybody converts to atheism. And we see that in our modern world today. We live in a very modern society in which religion is still very, very important and very resilient. So among the masses of Europe, deism had no appeal. It had appeal to the intellectuals, but not to everybody else. And so religion is very, very important. And in the 18th century, we see a huge revival. And one of the reasons for this revival is the fact that people's lives are centered around the church. The church is the center of society. Local parish churches centered communities. Sometimes churches, as we've seen following the new monarchs and absolutism, center the state. They become very important to people's lives. And so it doesn't really go away at all. And in a lot of ways, it's strengthened by absolutism. So deism is an intellectual movement, but as we're going to see, especially as we transfer into the French Revolution, it's not going to be completely adopted by the masses, not even in the slightest. So Mackay writes, thus the Reformation, initially so radical in its rejection of Rome and its stress on individual religious expression, eventually resulted in a bureaucratization of the church and local religious life, even of Protestant Europe. Both Catholics and Protestants were centering their societies around it. So the church, even by the time in the 1600s and 1700s, has become a very strong institution, whether it's the traditional Catholic Church or whether it becomes the Protestant churches. One of the great examples of this is Louis XV ordering the Jesuits out of France in 1763 because he saw it as a threat to his place as the head of the Catholic Church in France. And even the temporary dissolution of the Jesuits in 1773, even though they were later instated. So we see that deism is in opposition to a lot of monarchs, absolute monarchs, for instance, in France, but it never actually makes any headway in doing away with religion. In a lot of ways, the state becomes so reliant on religion that life at the local and at the state level is in a lot of ways tied together by religion. So we'll talk about the two revivals. There's going to be a Protestant revival and there's going to be a Catholic revival in this time period. The Protestant revival begins in Germany, and it becomes known as Pietism. And it really is a spiritual movement. And it wanted to reassert this idea that people have a connection to God, and that it wanted to try to bring up morality, and it wanted to try to focus on the spiritual life of Christianity. The 1700s sees a revival on both sides of the Atlantic. There's revivals that occur in the Americas in this attempt to reassert the importance of the Christian faith in everyone's life. And some of this is still debated on why these revivals take place. It partly may have to do with reaction to scientific and revolution and enlightenment. But we'll pick up on this in just a second in the next segment of the video.